At 87, Anthony Hopkins breaks his silence. For a man who has spent a lifetime studying human nature, monsters, geniuses, broken souls, what he says now shocks even those closest to him. After years of calm and mystery, the Welsh legend has finally revealed the 5 stars he could never stand. 5 names that, in his own words, taught me more about arrogance than art. Insiders say this revelation didn't come from anger, but exhaustion. A man who's seen too much vanity, too much deceit, too many masks worn off set. Hollywood, Hopkins once said, is full of talent and full of ghosts pretending to be alive. So why speak now, after decades of silence? Friends believe it's not revenge, it's reflection. A confession from an actor who's mastered empathy, but never learned to tolerate hypocrisy. And with that, we arrive at his list. 5 names, 5 wounds, 5 lessons carved into a lifetime of brilliance. Let's begin with number 5. Number 5, Christian Bale. When Anthony Hopkins first met Christian Bale on the set of The Flowers of War, he admired the young actor's intensity until that intensity turned into arrogance. According to insiders, Bale approached Hopkins between takes and said, half serious, "You're one of the few old actors I still respect, but you don't scare me." Hopkins didn't respond. He didn't need to. But something in his silence unsettled everyone around them. Crew members recall Hopkins finishing the scene in one chilling take. No rehearsal, no wasted motion. When he walked off set, he said quietly, "Acting isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who listens best." From that day on, their relationship grew cold. Hopkins respected Bale's craft, but despised his obsession with control. The same obsession that once drove Bale to yell at crew members during Terminator Salvation. To Hopkins, that behavior wasn't dedication. It was ego disguised as art. "There's madness in every artist," he once said. "The difference is whether you feed it or fight it." When asked years later if he saw himself in Bale, Hopkins simply replied, "God, I hope not." Those close to him say Bale was the first actor to remind Hopkins of the danger of becoming his own character, of losing humanity in pursuit of perfection. "Talent," Hopkins said, "isn't power, it's responsibility." And with that, Bale became the first name on a list Hopkins never meant to write, but could no longer ignore. Number 4, Jared Leto. When Jared Leto burst into Hollywood, many called him the new method icon. Anthony Hopkins called him something else, a child playing with fire. Their tension began long before they ever met. Hopkins had grown tired of hearing stories about Leto's extreme methods, sending dead rats to co-stars, staying in character for months, blurring the line between madness and art. "That's not method," Hopkins once told a director. "That's vanity with a script." When they finally met at an awards event in Los Angeles, Leto approached Hopkins with what witnesses described as forced humility. He told him, "You're one of my idols. I try to disappear into my characters, like you do." Hopkins smiled faintly and replied, "Then you've missed the point. I disappear into the story, not myself." Insiders say Leto was visibly uncomfortable. Later that night, he reportedly told friends Hopkins was too old to understand modern acting. Hopkins, of course, said nothing. Silence has always been his most cutting weapon. Years later, when Hopkins won the Oscar for The Father, Leto posted a vague congratulatory tweet. But those who knew both men said it was hollow. "There's no respect between them," a producer confided. Hopkins sees him as proof that Hollywood confuses chaos for depth. For Hopkins, Leto embodies the danger of worshiping transformation over truth. "You don't have to bleed for a role," he once said. "You just have to be honest." And that's something he believes Leto never learned. Number 3. Shia LaBeouf. Anthony Hopkins once called acting a dangerous drug. And when he met Shia LaBeouf, he saw an addict, not to alcohol or fame, but to chaos itself. Their collaboration on Transformers, Dark of the Moon, was supposed to bridge generations, the wise veteran and the rising rebel. Instead, it became a quiet clash of values. According to insiders, Hopkins found LaBeouf's volatility exhausting. "He would show up brilliant one day," a crew member said, "and unbearable the next." During one lunch break, Hopkins tried to offer advice. "Don't waste your fire on noise. Save it for the work." LaBeouf reportedly smirked and replied, "You don't understand, Tony. Chaos is the work." Hopkins didn't argue. He simply looked at him and said, "Then chaos will own you." Years later, when LaBeouf's career imploded under scandal, Hopkins sent him a handwritten note, not out of pity, but warning. It read, "The storm isn't the enemy. Forgetting who you are inside it, that's the real tragedy." LaBeouf never responded, but those close to Hopkins say he kept a copy of that letter in his study, as a reminder of what happens when talent devours discipline. "I've danced with my demons," Hopkins once said, "but I never let them lead." To him, Shia LaBeouf wasn't evil, just lost. A mirror of what Hopkins himself might have become, had he never learned to stop chasing pain. Number 2. Russell Crowe. There was a time Anthony Hopkins admired Russell Crowe. The power, the presence, the storm in his eyes. It reminded him of a young Brando. But admiration turned to disappointment the moment Hopkins saw how easily rage could replace craft. Their first real encounter came in 2001, at a dinner following the Oscars. Crowe, fresh off his Gladiator win, was loud, charming, and, after too many drinks, brutally honest. He told Hopkins, "I grew up watching you, man, but I could never play someone that quiet. That's boring as hell." Hopkins looked at him, smiled politely, and said, "You mistake silence for emptiness. That's your problem." Witnesses say the table went dead silent. Crowe tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck. Over the years, Crowe's reputation for explosive behavior only grew. On sets, in interviews, backstage, anger followed him like a shadow. Hopkins once confided to a producer, "Talent isn't measured by how loud you roar. It's how softly you can tell the truth." When asked years later if he'd ever work with Crowe, Hopkins shook his head. "He's brilliant, but brilliance without restraint burns everyone around it." Insiders claim Crowe once reached out for a collaboration, a historical epic. Hopkins declined. The reason was simple. "I don't need another storm," he said. To Hopkins, Crowe became a lesson he'd already lived. Proof that genius without grace turns into tragedy. "The hardest role to play," he said once, "is a man who knows when to stop fighting." Number 1. Johnny Depp. Few names disappointed Anthony Hopkins more than Johnny Depp. Once hailed as one of the most versatile actors of his generation, Depp represented everything Hopkins once believed in: transformation, mystery, depth. But somewhere along the way, all of that turned into theater without truth. Their first meeting was brief, back in the mid-2000s. Depp approached Hopkins at a London event, calling him a true master of character. Hopkins, polite as ever, simply replied, "Then master yourself first." At the time, it sounded like a compliment. Years later, it felt like prophecy. When Depp's personal life began collapsing under lawsuits, scandals, and chaos, Hopkins stayed silent, but those close to him knew the silence meant disappointment, not judgment. "Johnny lost the art," he said quietly once. "He started performing his life instead of living it." Insiders reveal Hopkins had once been approached to co-star with Depp in a psychological thriller. He refused, telling producers, "I can't share a screen with someone still trying to find who they are." To Hopkins, Depp's tragedy wasn't about addiction or fame. It was about forgetting what acting truly meant, listening, not performing. "The mask is useful," Hopkins once said, "until you forget it's there. Then the mask starts wearing you." For him, Johnny Depp became the perfect symbol of Hollywood's slow decay. A man too brilliant to fade and too lost to return. For years, Hollywood whispered that Anthony Hopkins kept a blacklist. No one ever saw it until a quiet interview changed everything. Sitting in his home in Malibu, surrounded by classical music and half-finished sketches, Hopkins finally admitted it was true. But not in the way anyone expected. He reached for an old leather notebook, worn and faded, and showed the reporter 5 simple names. No headlines, no explanations, just one short line written underneath. "I don't despise them. I despise what they became." The room went silent. Hopkins explained that each name was not a grudge. It was a mirror, a reminder of how easily art can be poisoned by ego, fame, or fear. "I've seen men destroy their talent for applause," he said. "I just never wanted to join them." The journalist later described the moment as chilling, not because of anger, but because of the peace in Hopkins' voice. There was no bitterness, only truth. That was the real twist. The list wasn't about hatred at all. It was a confession from a man who learned that the greatest danger in Hollywood isn't losing a role. It's losing yourself. At 87, Anthony Hopkins no longer plays for applause. He paints. He plays piano. He walks by the ocean near his Malibu home, smiling at strangers who have no idea they're standing next to one of the greatest actors alive. He says little about Hollywood now. But when he does, his words carry the quiet weight of someone who has seen too much and survived himself. "I used to think success was freedom," he said. "Then I realized freedom is what's left when you stop needing success." Those 5 names, Bale, Leto, LaBeouf, Crowe, Depp, are not enemies. They are warnings, fragments of a lesson that took him a lifetime to understand. That genius without grace becomes noise, and fame without humility turns men into ghosts. Hopkins has made peace with it all. No resentment, no regret, just clarity. "In the end," he whispered once, "the only person you must not disappoint is the one still staring back at you." And with that, the man who once played monsters and kings leaves one final message for the world. Even the gentlest soul can see darkness and still choose light.